They were the unseen force behind Celtic power, robed figures moving through sacred groves, whispering to trees, speaking in riddles, and holding knowledge older than empires. They carried no swords, but their presence commanded kings. They wore no crowns, yet entire tribes bowed before them. They were the Druids. To some, they were sages, philosophers, judges, and healers. To others, they were shadowy manipulators, keepers of dark rituals and blood-soaked ceremonies. To the Romans, they were dangerous, too powerful, too persuasive, too mysterious. Julius Caesar called them sorcerers, seditionists, a threat not just to Rome's expansion, but to its very soul. And so the burning began, not just of temples, but of memory. Scrolls were never written, voices were silenced, knowledge faded into myth. But who were the Druids, really? Were they ancient scientists who understood the stars better than any Roman scholar? Were they guardians of balance, protectors of sacred law, interpreters of the natural world? Or were they cunning political operatives, hiding behind robes and ritual to control a fractured society? The truth is hidden, buried in the mists of time, lost in the ashes of conquest, and tangled in centuries of propaganda. But one thing is certain, the Druids were feared for a reason. This is not just a story of ancient magic, it's a story of power, resistance, and the price of being different. Step into the forest, quiet now, and listen. The Druids are whispering still. They didn't build cities. They didn't forge empires. They left behind no written records of their own. And yet they were among the most powerful figures in ancient Europe. They were the Druids, a class of priest scholars, advisors, and mystics who stood at the very center of Celtic life. To be a Druid was to carry the memory of your people. Every law, every lineage, every sacred tale passed down through generations, held in the mind, never on paper. Writing was seen as dangerous. Words were meant to live, to breathe, to be spoken, beneath the branches of oak trees, not buried in scrolls. Training to become a Druid could take 20 years or more. The process was intense, secretive, and deeply spiritual. Young initiates would enter the woods as students. They would emerge decades later as living libraries, walking vessels of myth, science, astronomy, medicine, and law. They learned the rhythms of nature, the names of stars, the cycles of the moon, the healing properties of every plant and root. But the Druids were not just scholars, they were power brokers. They settled tribal disputes, advised chieftains in matters of war and diplomacy, presided over rituals too sacred for common eyes. In many Celtic societies, even the king could not act without the blessing of the Druids. Their words could halt a battle or spark a rebellion. Their silence could condemn a leader to ruin. They were untouchable. Roman sources, even those filled with hatred, admitted this. Druids were often exempt from military service and taxes. They lived apart, in forests and on holy islands, like Mona in modern-day Wales. They were guardians of the threshold, between the seen and unseen, the mortal and the divine. But with great reverence came great fear. Because the Druids didn't only serve the people, they served the gods, and sometimes that meant blood. Human sacrifice, as reported by Greek and Roman authors, was attributed to their rituals. Victims offered to oak trees, bodies burned in massive effigies known as wicker men. Were these exaggerations, tools of imperial propaganda, or glimpses into something far older and far more unsettling? The truth remains elusive, but one thing is undeniable. Druids held immense influence, not through armies, but through mystery, not through conquest, but through knowledge. They were the soul of Celtic culture, its living spirit, robed not in armor, but in myth. And as Rome advanced, that spirit became a threat. They gathered beneath the ancient oaks, hooded, silent, and solemn. The night air was thick with incense, the stars aligned above them like watchful eyes. The Druids did not build temples, nature was their cathedral. Every forest clearing, every river bank, every stone circle was sacred ground. Their rituals were secret, passed down orally, never written, and guarded with deadly seriousness. To witness one was either a blessing or a death sentence. To the Romans and Greeks, the Druids were sorcerers, masters of forbidden knowledge. They read omens in the flight of birds, divined the future through the entrails of animals, and whispered to the dead. They carried sickles made of gold to cut mistletoe, the sacred plant believed to cure poison, grant fertility, and protect against evil. But not all rites were gentle. Roman chroniclers, especially Julius Caesar and Tacitus, accused the Druids of performing human sacrifices. Prisoners of war, criminals, or sometimes even volunteers were said to be bound, stabbed, and burned alive inside giant effigies, the infamous Wicker Man. These offerings, they claimed, were made to appease the gods of war, harvest, and death. Is it true? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was Rome's attempt to justify genocide, a convenient horror story to paint their enemies as savages. Archaeological evidence is sparse but not non-existent. Bog bodies found in Ireland and Britain bear marks of ritual execution, throats cut, bodies weighted, placed with care in sacred wetlands, a trinity of wounds, strangulation, stabbing, and bludgeoning, symbolic offerings. Whether myth or fact, the image of the blood-soaked Druid became legend. Yet, to the Celts, these rituals weren't evil, they were balance. Life and death were cycles, not opposites. To give something, especially life, was the ultimate act of reverence. Nature took and gave, so did the gods. And the Druids were the intermediaries. They understood the power of symbolism. The oak tree symbolized strength, mistletoe, renewal. Fire represented transformation. A Druid ceremony was not mere spectacle, it was cosmic theater. Every gesture had meaning. Every chant was a thread in the web of the universe. But make no mistake, power flowed through these rituals. Spiritual power, political power, psychological control. To lead a ritual was to command belief, and belief is the most dangerous weapon of all. So, were the Druids dark priests performing barbaric rites? Or were they misunderstood spiritual leaders, guardians of a belief system older than Rome itself? The line between reverence and fear is always thin, and in the moonlit forests of ancient Gaul and Britannia, that line vanished completely. The Druids had no armies, no fortresses, no banners flying in the wind. And yet, to the Roman Empire, the greatest military machine of its time, they were a threat so profound, so unsettling, that they had to be erased. Julius Caesar, during his brutal conquest of Gaul, made it clear: the sword was not his only weapon. The pen was just as sharp. In his Commentari de Bello Gallico, Caesar painted the Druids as dangerous zealots, instigators of rebellion, manipulators of the tribal masses, and orchestrators of resistance. He knew that to conquer the Celts, he had to sever their soul. In Rome's eyes, the Druids represented everything it feared: unstructured belief, unbreakable tradition, and an invisible power that no legion could crush with brute force alone. The Druids could not be bribed. They answered to no emperor. Their allegiance was to the earth, to the gods, to truths that lay beyond Rome's grasp. And so, Rome responded the only way it knew how, with annihilation. Sacred groves were burned to the ground. Holy islands, like Mona, modern-day Anglesey, were invaded. Druid sanctuaries reduced to ash and blood. Those who resisted were killed. Those who remembered were silenced. Oral tradition, once passed from teacher to student in the shadows of the trees, vanished in smoke. It wasn't just a purge. It was a calculated erasure, a cultural decapitation. Rome could not tolerate a force it couldn't control, and what it couldn't control it destroyed. But even as the flames rose, even as Druid voices were extinguished, the fear remained. Deep in the Roman psyche, the image of the Druid lingered, not as a defeated enemy, but as a haunting symbol. the one they couldn't fully understand, the one who knew things they didn't, the one who whispered secrets not even Jupiter himself could command. Tacitus, writing about the sack of Mona, did not describe victory with triumph, but with unease. He noted how the Roman soldiers trembled as they faced the Druids, who stood chanting, arms raised, invoking powers far older than Rome. It wasn't just war, it felt like sacrilege. And perhaps it was. Because when you silence a voice that speaks for the land, the gods, and the soul of a people, you don't just win a battle, you inherit a curse. Rome tried to bury the Druids in flames and fear, but some knowledge cannot be unlearned. Some myths refuse to die. So, did the Druids vanish, consumed by Rome's fire and steel, or did they endure, like the roots of an ancient oak, hidden beneath the surface, waiting? Rome declared victory. Its legions marched back with gold, stories, and silence. The groves were cut down, the hymns faded, the last teachers faded into legend. But something remained. Echoes, fragments, whispers on the wind. Some say the Druid spirit was not destroyed, it evolved. It moved through the cracks of the empire and took new forms. In Celtic Christianity, where saints roamed the woods and spoke to animals. In folk tales of wise men, women of the woods, and keepers of forgotten knowledge. In the way stone circles and sacred wells were never completely abandoned. And now, in the modern age, the Druids rise again, not as priests of blood, but as seekers of balance, a voice for nature, story, and ancestral truth. The Romans tried to define civilization as marble, law, and empire. The Druids brought something else: harmony, reverence, and memory. One system conquered, the other perhaps survived in silence. What if the Druids were never lost, just forgotten? Their spells may have faded, but their questions still resonate. Were they mystics or manipulators? Healers or heretics? Now, it's up to you to decide. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you find this story as haunting and powerful as we do, please hit the like button, subscribe to Whispering Myths, and ring the bell so you never miss another tale from the shadows of time. Because history doesn't always speak in thunder. Sometimes it whispers and waits for someone to listen.